Hey everyone, welcome back to iMissions, or welcome to iMissions. This is the channel where we explore what God is doing around the world in international missions, telling the stories of what He's done, seeing what remains to be done, and how you and I can be a part of what God is doing around the world. We got some amazing, exciting things coming up. I will be traveling in the next bit to ABWE's headquarters to interview several people, to look at their mission agency as a whole, to see what God is doing through them, and also to hear some of the specific stories about some of their missionaries and what they were able to see God do in the field. ABWE is a great mission agency that has about 1,000 missionaries overseas, a conservative Bible-believing mission agency, and that is coming from the United States here. So that's something exciting coming up. We also have some more missionary interviews coming up, sharing more stories of what God is doing. All right, well, today's topic, I'd like to talk about unreached people groups. Now, some of you are automatically going, I know exactly what you're talking about. Unreached people groups, got it. Others of you are going, what's an unreached people group? What are you talking about? Where's that in the Bible? What page? Right? And if you want me to give you chapter and verse, we will not find the words unreached people group in the Bible. However, what we will find is in the Great Commission, Jesus giving us a very explicit command to take the gospel, to disciple people from all nations. Now, when we look at that word, nations, is it the word for political entities, for nation states? And the answer is no, it's for tribes or people groups. How do we define a people group or a tribe? Generally, we understand a people group to be a group of people that self-identifies as something, right? Someone who looks at other people and say, you're outsiders and we are us. Americans would say, we're Americans. French would say, we're French. And they will look at other people and say, you're not part of us. All that to say, when we look at the world of groups of people that self-identify as a group, and usually we also see other barriers like languages, culture, food, history, and sometimes we see national borders playing a part to that. All that to say, we are to make disciples of all nations. Have we done that yet? And the answer is no. No, we haven't. We haven't made disciples of all tribes on the face of the earth, all self-identifying groups. These barriers between people groups also serve as barriers to the gospel, because there's a barrier to relationships, so the gospel that spreads through relationships won't spread easily over those barriers. Now, some people groups are closer to other people groups, just culturally, linguistically. It's very difficult to move from one people group to another people group, and we have a very specific word for this, and that is called missions. Is every Christian a missionary? And the answer is no. If a word stops meaning something, if it loses its meaning, then it doesn't have a purpose anymore. If the words Christian and missionary become interchangeable, why even have them? And you say, well, it emphasizes one of the things that a Christian ought to do. Well, Christians should be evangelists. Christians should be sharing the gospel. Christians should be part of planting churches and reaching the lost, discipling others. That's important. But are Christians missionaries by reaching the person down the street? And the answer is no, they're not. However you define the word missions, make sure that you have words in your vocabulary for foreign missionaries, cross-cultural missionaries, or something along those lines so that you can differentiate people whose ministry it is to cross cultural boundaries in order to share the gospel, because that is a very unique thing and a special thing. And it is something that we ought not to lose when we start playing the regular word games that we do in churches to motivate church members to do evangelism. Are those hard words? Yes, they are. But I passionately believe that we cannot relegate cross-cultural evangelism or cross-cultural missions to the same level that same-person evangelism takes place. And here's why. Because the task is for us to make disciples of all nations. But we shouldn't see discipleship, well, as long as you disciple somebody, it's all the same. Because we see Paul and Barnabas in Acts explicitly called to go where there are no churches, where there are no believers, to preach the gospel for the first time. Paul said that explicitly. He said, all over this whole area, there is no work left for me to do. He wasn't saying there were no unbelievers left. He wasn't saying that there was nowhere left to plant a church. What he said was that the gospel's already been preached here. There are churches that are planted. And his ministry, in his mind, and his calling were very clear to go where there were no churches. And so that call, that ministry has been passed down to believers today. Certain believers are called out to a special ministry to go where there are no churches. Now, when we send cross-cultural evangelists down to places like South America and other places where there are strong, vibrant national churches, what are they doing down there? Sometimes when they're doing what the national church there already is doing or competing with the national church or whatever like that, sometimes they're not planting churches where there are no churches. And are they really missionaries? That's an interesting question to ask. And, if you have strong opinions or even some thoughts or further questions, pop those in the comments down below, because that is a conversation. But if people are called to go where there are no churches, there's a lot of people groups out there that still have no missionaries to them. There's over 1,000 people groups that still have no missionaries sent to them. We keep sending missionaries to places where churches have already been established. We keep sending pastors and evangelists to places within the United States, to places where they have strong, vibrant churches. That's not to discount the necessity for a people group's church to reach that people group for Jesus, right? That's important. I am not called as a international missionary or a cross-cultural missionary or a straight missionary per se, because I am called by God to serve at my local church and to reach my community. And so that's what I am doing. And that's my calling, my responsibility, is to reach Americans in my community with the gospel. But I am also called by God to participate in what he's doing in international missions or cross-cultural missions. And so my church participates in sending missionaries and working with a mission board that sends missionaries. And I mean cross-cultural missionaries to where there are no churches. Because that's what we as a global church are called to do, to participate in that. And so we will. But we all need to be on board with that. As they've said, there are those who go down the well, and there are those who hold the rope. If we are called, the many are called to be holding the rope, let us not be found any less committed to this task than the person that's going down the well, okay? And it is a tragedy when missionaries get sent and the people holding the rope let go. I've seen it before. I have served overseas in a missionary capacity. I have served in semi-missionary capacities as well, where I was serving overseas as a believer. But all that to say, For us to reach unreached people groups, we need to be going to those unreached people groups, beaming satellite images of Benny Hinn and other televangelists off satellites into their country in English is not us doing our job as disciple makers, as those who are following the Great Commission and participating in the Great Commission. The Great Commission is us with participating in the mission with Jesus. The Holy Spirit working within us to accomplish the mission. The co-mission requires us to be a part of it. And the mission is where there are no churches. And there should be a special place in our hearts, a special place in our wallets, a special place in everything in our prayers for those who are out there risking hardship and being uncomfortable where they are, learning languages, adapting themselves to culture, because cross-cultural ministry is very, very difficult. Not only are you going up against a language barrier, but you're going up against a cultural barrier. Each people group has different ways of burying people who have passed away. Rights about how to raise their children, how they view God, how they understand their place in the world, how they interact with their community, how they communicate with their community, how they communicate ideas, values, and fears with each other, how they confront each other. There are so many rituals and cultural things that attach themselves to each culture that you cannot learn those in a lifetime. People who grow up in a culture still don't realize all the things that are embedded in their culture. Only in a group of people that are native born can they really truly understand and feel all of those things. So the best we can do is we try to be this bridge for the gospel to go into this new people group, so that people from within that culture can become those evangelists, can be the people that take the gospel to the people that are like them. God can do miracles and does all the time, but ultimately a church planting movement must begin within that people group, and it must be led and run by people from that people group. And it needs to take on the distinctive characteristics of that people group. Foreign missionaries cannot do that, but they are so critical in getting that ball rolling. And that first generation of believers needs to be discipled and think through their culture, and need that help to think through their culture biblically about what things need to be jettisoned, what needs to be cast out, what needs to be kept, what needs to be modified. Of all those things. How should someone in our culture get married as a Christian? How should someone in our culture be buried in our culture, but yet as a Christian? These are so important things, and it's an unbelievably hard and long and amazingly miraculous process. International missionaries, cross-cultural missionaries are a special thing. And their task is to go to the unreached people groups of the world. Hit me up in the comments below. Let's discuss. Talk to other people. Let other people know what you're doing. If you see other missionary resources on YouTube, please share those in the comments below with each other. And let's all consider what God would have us to do to participate in what He's doing amongst the nations. God bless. I'll see you later from iMissions.